The word coach hasn't always meant the person on the sidelines yelling at you. So let me explain that a little bit. A couple hundred years ago, a coach was a box on wheels, a carriage, if you will, right? People would ride in the box. You'd have a driver up front, you'd have a horse or a team of horses, and they had one job. They were to take you from point A to point B. And that's important because when we talk about what a coach means now, we need to understand what a good coach is and what a not so good coach is. I wouldn't call him a bad coach, but let's really understand what 5 things it takes to be a good coach or to recognize a good coach. Because when you think about the driver of the carriage or the coach, right? That person is there to navigate the road or the path ahead, right? So someone has to steer the ship, even though the person is the one paying for passage. And so what I'm going to cover today is going to be what makes a great coach. Let's understand when you potentially need one and why that is so important, especially as it relates to regaining your health or getting your butt back in shape after a long break away from doing anything physical. I could do, and you could listen to, an entire episode about good coaching, but unless you actually experience good coaching yourself, you're not going to know the difference, right? You can read about it, you can listen about it, but until you experience it, you just don't know what it feels like. Now, because most of you are former athletes, you probably know what a good coach is, and you probably also know what a bad coach is. And so what I want you to focus on are the traits and characteristics of the good coach that you had and frame it into what we're going to talk about today. So that way you can now recognize outside of sport what a good coach is and what a not so good coach is. I think in business people call them leaders and managers, but it's the same. All right, so let's get into it. What's up and welcome back. I'm glad you're here with me again this week. I know I've got a bunch of new subscribers. So if you're new here, my name's Jenny. I played Division I basketball and I turned into a strength and conditioning coach, and now I work with specifically former athletes. And just like you, I know what it takes to perform on the court, but maybe you're trying to figure out what it feels like to perform after sport ends. And so for the last 15 years, I've helped coach ex-athletes, just like you and me, through this exact transition, right? Getting strong, getting healthy again, and actually keeping it, right? Finding sustainable ways instead of the up and down yo-yo pattern that most non-athletic people go through. And here's the thing, I'm not guessing at this. I've run this with real clients and watched it work, and I've spent the last decade, or over the last decade, sharpening these processes. So, if you used to compete and you want your body to work for you again without turning the gym into a second job, you're in the absolute right spot. So real quick, because I think this is going to set up the rest of our conversation today. Let's do a little bit of etymology, meaning let's talk about the background of the words. We're going to start with the word coach. And like I mentioned in the article over the weekend, this is a transitory word that used to mean one thing and now typically means something else. And this whole thought process was spurred from a statement I made in the article 2 weeks ago, when I mentioned that just getting advice is not the same thing as actually getting coached. And so I wanted to do a little bit deeper dive on this. But in order to understand how to identify a good coach, then you probably need to know what the words mean. So that's where I'm starting with today. So the word coach actually comes from a vehicle, a stagecoach, if you will, right? There's a driver up front, like I mentioned in the intro, who's controlling the path, correcting for the road, and a team of horses pulling the whole thing forward towards your desired destination. Now, it wasn't until the 1860s that people actually started using the word coach for someone who was working or training athletes, which makes total sense because a coach has always been and will probably always be about getting someone from where they are right now to where they are trying to go, right? And instead of it being a vehicle, that vehicle became a person. So there's the background of a coach, right? You are a youth athlete. Your goal is to make the high school team. So there's a bit of development that has to happen between where you are now, the skill sets that you have, and where you are trying to get to as stop one on your development, which would be high school. Now, if you're in high school and you're working with another coach, you probably have multiple coaches, a skill coach, your team coach, strength conditioning coach, and now your goal is to make a college roster. Okay, cool. They need to get you from where you are now to where you are trying to go, probably even before you get to that level. And the same thing from college to the pros, or from college now to retirement, which is where I come in. So because the coach has both the direction and the game plan, let's talk about the opposite of that, which is where this whole conversation that I'm having with you today has come from, and this idea of advice. And advice, very, very similar to opinions, are like buttholes. Everyone has some, or in some cases, one, right? So advice actually comes from a French term, and I'm sure there's some Latin roots in there as well, which is avis or avis, and that simply just means that advice is an opinion, okay? It's someone's view or perspective on a subject. Typically, there's not a lot of context. There's not a lot of, extra information. It's just, hey, go do this very generic thing, often with the qualifier of, well, it worked for me. It must probably then also work for you. And that's where a lot of these fitness cults come into play. That's where the nutrition folks get really weird and cultish as well, of like, they are leaning into this idea of advice because it worked for them, and now they're proselytizing that out to the rest of the world to say, hey, go try this thing because it worked for me, right? It could work for you, but they are very passionate about it. And usually advice is given without a clear destination. And like I said, it's usually very generic in nature, okay? And really it's a take it or leave it type statement. Hey, eat more protein. Cool. Eat more protein for what? Eat more protein so that you can gain muscle? Cool. Well, how much muscle am I trying to gain? How much protein should I eat? When should I eat it, right? There's typically a lot of follow-up questions that come with some of this blanket advice that people provide you. And so as we go through this, just keep in mind, you can get information anywhere. Information has become a commodity. You can get it from just about any source, TV, magazines in the grocery store checkout line, if you still do that, Instagram, God forbid, TikTok, along with a dance that goes with it, right? So you can get advice, but you often can't get coaching because typically that comes from a very specific place with a very specific outcome in mind. Okay, so as we go through the rest of the conversation, I want you to keep this distinction between these two terms in the back of your head, right? Because this is going to be the thread that runs through everything, okay? So let's talk about what it actually takes to make a great coach. And again, I want you to think back to a really good coach that you've had somewhere along your career. So now in the strength and conditioning world, a great coach is not someone who writes the best program, not someone who comes up with the flashiest plan. And after almost 2 decades of doing this, it comes down to a handful of traits. And these are the things that make great coaches. So the first one is they start with where you are. They meet you where you are right here, right now, okay? Not with what has happened in the past, even though that does play a part in this conversation and not what should be happening. It's grounded in reality. Okay, what's happening right now, and ideally, this serves as the baseline for where you're trying to go. Now, on the flip side of that, if you're just getting advice, it is very templated. It is, here's the thing for a general issue. The protein for muscle gain is a great one. Hey, you need to eat more protein to gain muscle. Cool. All right. But if I'm talking to a coach, if I'm being coached or if I'm coaching, it starts with, hey, you're eating this much protein each day for your goal of, fill in the blank here, for your goal of 15% body fat, we need to increase your protein intake by 10%. Now, here are the next 3 steps on how we're going to do that. Now, it's a little bit longer of a conversation and it's much more involved, but you should feel like you're getting that much more out of your coaching than just, hey, go eat more protein because it's going to be helpful for you. That's cool. Yeah, you go and eat more protein, maybe things get better, maybe they don't. But your coach is taking your baseline, understanding how that relates to the outcome you're chasing, and then helps to create a plan. But it all starts with where you are right now. And that just takes a little bit of evaluation. It takes time and it takes effort, but that evaluation piece sets you up for the rest of your journey. The other thing that great coaches do and have is what I call the coach's eye, right? They see things about you that you can't see about yourself. And this is a big one, and I'll share a story with this later on, but I think that having an extra set of eyes, and to be honest, I have worked with coaches. I've worked with management coaches. I've worked with personal development coaches. I've worked with strength and conditioning coaches. I've worked with basketball coaches, right? Like, I have been coached in just about every single way. And this is always something that I catch myself falling back into, especially when I'm writing my own training program, right? Because you have blind spots. And just like everyone else, remember, I'm not perfect. I'm human. As much as my wife likes to think I'm a fitness robot. But you have blind spots. You can't see everything. And so you fall into the trap of doing the things you like to do and the things that you think work best. But when you get a coach who can zoom out a little bit and see how things interact, and this is actually what happened last summer. I was working with one of my buddies, Justin, who is a pretty cool strength and conditioning coach, and he helped me figure out a few things in my training that I was missing. Okay, so he helped uncover some of my blind spots. And it's not because he just said, hey, here's a program, go do it. He asked me what I was doing. He asked me what I enjoyed doing, what I didn't like doing, right? So he did a little bit of that evaluation we talked about in the first point. And he was able to say, all right, well, you're missing this, this, and this. You're missing ankle dorsiflexion, which I kind of knew, but I didn't really want to address. But then we addressed it, got a little bit better. So my ankles and feet were moving a little bit better. We addressed a little bit of overhead shoulder mobility, right? Or the ability for me to get my arm up overhead. And those things actually enhanced my training. So a great coach's whole value is being able to stand outside of your perspective and catching what you cannot catch on your own. And you can be as honest with yourself as you possibly want, but you're the worst judge of your own blind spots, which is why they're blind spots for you, okay? So if we're thinking about what a coach should be doing, it's not stating the obvious, it's stating what you're unable to see. The third piece is they adjust the plan as we go. So if we think about it, an old school MapQuest, just for a second, okay? You get on the internet, you type in your destination. This is very similar to how people are writing their own fitness programs on AI. But you type in your destination and MapQuest spits out the route that you should take. You print the page, you grab it, you go get in your car, and you start driving. But then what happens when you run into a detour? You're like, oh no, I'm getting off on these local roads. I hope I don't get into a sundown town. Like some of these things that you're like, I've made a wrong turn. How do I adjust? Well, with MapQuest, you were kind of stuck until you either spent and wasted a lot of time trying to figure it out yourself, or you found a library, went back in and did a reroute, right? But that seems like it's a waste of time and energy. But if you have a coach, which is very similar to a new GPS or the GPS, right? Following a GPS on uh, Google Maps or whatever, right? You put in your destination, you start driving, you hit a detour. Your coach should be able to help you follow the detour, get you right back on track without wasting a ton of time, effort, or energy. In the same way that a GPS will take you on a slight detour that doesn't take you through the backwoods where you feel like your life is in danger, or you waste a lot of gas or time on the road because you took a wrong turn, right? Or you didn't see something coming. The coach is still helping you get to your destination. A great coach does this with your training. They adjust how many sets and reps you're doing. That maybe they adjust the exercises. Maybe they adjust your training schedule because maybe you're training too frequently and not recovering, or you're in a busy phase of the year and you're like, well, I'm not getting my training in. So then it's maybe reducing the frequency of your training, right? All right, well, that's your schedule. The coach will help with that and will help talk you through how you manage both a really busy life outside the gym and getting the most out of the gym. And then any setbacks you run into, oh, you tweak your back because you picked up your kid funky. Okay, great. Well, let's adjust your training. Or you're not as active as you are right now. Well, let's adjust your nutrition, right? And so depending on the situation that arises, a great coach will help you navigate it. Okay? And then that leads us to this other idea, right? Is that when you are working with a good coach, and I had this with my coach in college, when I looked her in the eye, I couldn't lie to her. I just had to tell the truth. And I think that has served me into my professional career. But a great coach allows you to build enough trust with them that you'll actually tell them the truth, no matter how hard it is. Now, often, people will hold things back if they feel like they're going to be judged, if they're going to be scrutinized, or there's any sort of negative connotation from sharing a thought or an action that you've had. Now, I've had clients who have come to me and said, "Oh, Jenny, I can't track." I'm like, "Well, what do you mean you can't track your food, your workouts? What can't you track? Like, help me understand." And the way to approach these conversations, right? Because they think it's going to be a hassle, is to go in and just ask questions and to be empathetic. A great coach is going to come in and seek to understand exactly where you're coming from. Where is this deep-seated fear stemming, right? So is it coming from, well, you're afraid to understand the truth. You're afraid that you're going to fail, so you go ahead and self-sabotage now. Like, a great coach gives you the time and the space so that you're not afraid to tell the truth, and you're still going to show up for yourself and they're going to show up for you. Okay? So, I mean, these are 4 things that if you go to find a coach, you want to have. And you can ask questions of like, okay, tell me what you do again. And if they don't check these 4 boxes, then that might not be the coach for you. Because remember, the whole goal of the coach is to get you from point A to point B. And if you continue on, is to get you from point B to point C, right? And maybe it's a round trip. Maybe you get where you're going and you come right back, and then that's the end of it. Potentially, it just depends on what you are trying to get out of that relationship, because it truly is a relationship. It's not a friendship. It's not a partnership. It's a relationship that is collaborative and requires each of you to be honest with the other. All right. So if you're wondering, okay, well, does this actually apply to me, or when do I actually need a coach? Well, when you're doing everything right on paper, you are eating quote unquote well. You are going to the gym a couple days a week, but the needle is not moving for you, even though you're showing up. That's one. Another is you're just overwhelmed with conflicting advice that's coming from 5 different sources, and you're experiencing paralysis by analysis. You're more confused now than you ever have been. You're overwhelmed with information, and it's very clear that you don't know what your next step should be. That's another time that you might actually benefit from working with a coach, okay? Another one is, okay, maybe you feel like something's off, but you really can't put your finger on it. Well, it's either a blind spot, it's either a lack of acknowledgement of an issue you're experiencing. Maybe you just are in denial about getting older and not performing like you used to, right? But when you feel like something's off, but you can't name it, then it might be time for a second set of eyes. Okay? And then the last one, I think this one's probably pretty important. As I mentioned AI earlier, right? You type your little prompt into AI, and I've talked about this here on the show before. You type it into AI, you get a plan, you're executing the plan, and then life throws you a curveball. Well, even if you were to type that into AI, it's not going to be able to exactly give you a specific set of next steps. It'll give you more general because these AI machines are built on not hard answers. They're going to give you a softball of an answer. And here's the thing, the plan probably set you up for failure that they gave you because life threw that curveball that possibly could have been accounted for if you were working with a coach. But, so is life. You live and you learn. And while any of those are a signal, maybe you're at a point where you're just not looking for more information. You're looking for someone to tell you exactly what to do. Someone else to drive you down that path. So let me share my example, right? And I shared this in the article, but there's obviously more to the story, right? And as I mentioned, I'll keep my client's name out my mouth, but here's the real example, okay? This client came to me. We started working through a mutual connection. We started working together. We made it through the training piece, and she had a little bit of struggle with the training piece of understanding that being a sedentary desk worker is a recipe for disaster, physically, mentally, emotionally, nutritionally, blood work, all over the place, right? And she came to me in some pain, right? She was dealing with some back stuff. And it took a second to work through the training only phase of my approach, right? And so at that point, I realized, okay, we've built a decent foundation of training routine. You're in the gym, you're doing your thing, you're starting to work with a little bit of intensity. We've got structures in place for any sort of setbacks. Let's start talking about nutrition. Because she had a goal of fat loss. This is every person who says they want to lose fat, okay? Now, before we started having this conversation, she brought me little snippets of blogs she had read, things that influencers on Facebook and Instagram had said, right? She had, cut carbs, but was eating fats. Well, now she's eating gummy bears before she rides, but cutting protein, right? So it was kind of all over the place. A lot of just this compilation of generic information that none was built specifically for her. And this is also one of my clients who thought she was in a caloric deficit, but actually wasn't, right? And so when we finally got her to agree, or I got her to agree to track her macros, there was some resistance. And so If it would have just been the piece of advice of, hey, go track your macros and we'll see what it looks like, that is advice in and of itself. Go track your macros to see where you are. That's advice. But when someone puts up resistance to taking action, a coach then is supposed to dig deeper. And that's what we did, right? And I was able to discover that she had a fear of of failing. She had a fear of making changes that might upset her partner because he was very outspoken about how he felt about, eating well. He's like, I eat whatever and look at me, when she was on the opposite side of the coin here, right? And so she told, like, her general conversation of, yeah, I put some butter on my potato, but it was a small potato. We had ribeye last night. This morning I had, whole eggs and a peanut butter toast, right? So it's not that she was eating anything inherently bad, but it was that she was missing a little bit of structure, and she was missing, the confidence in herself to create change, which was the same thing that we saw because she struggled a little bit getting through the building the training routine part, right? Of being a little bit nervous about making the change. And so, when we look at these things as a coach through my eyes, it's like, okay, this is the resistance that you're putting up, but help me understand why this is the thing that's a sticking point for you. Help me understand, what it is that you are struggling with, not the tracking, because that's the most obvious thing. Let's peel this onion back a little bit and help me understand that, okay, there's a little bit of social stigma that goes with tracking your food. There's a little bit of extra work, but all of these things can be flipped and phrased in ways that are actually positive. Well, the social stigma piece, all right, you're role modeling to your friends that you actually care about how your body performs, how your body looks, how you're able to show up for your friends and family. That's what tracking shows them. Not that you're a fitness freak and you're trying to keep. No, it's that you are showing that you are willing to invest in yourself. And this is essentially the coaching conversation I had with her. And living in the South makes that really difficult because tasty foods are everywhere. I'm relearning that right after being in Colorado for so long. I'm coming back to the South and I'm like, oh yes, this is a thing. That's right. Those collard greens with the fat back and the bacon green. Oh, it's delicious. But I know that for my health, I need to limit those things, not restrict them, but limit them, and then fit it into some macros. And so using, right, the emotional draw of reframing was able to help her with getting over the hump of tracking. And it was one of the same techniques I used when we were trying to get over the hump of training, right? Of getting into a regular routine. And while it takes a little bit of time, it is a much longer and beneficial investment of effort and energy than just listening to all the advice that you could possibly get on the interwebs and then being overwhelmed, right? It's clearing up the noise and finding your best path forward, just like a coach driver would. Finding the clearest path forward. And so I say all this to say, okay, advice is going to fail you because it's really just an opinion with no context for your life. It's random statements, and when you put them with other random statements, you don't get a cohesive program. You end up with random outcomes. Sometimes good, sometimes maybe shit, right? And so you can take that, you can go and do the thing, and you could get some pretty decent results. But if you are trying to make the most of your investment, right, you have to do the part that's a little less obvious. Even great coaching can be challenging. It's going to be longer in its turnaround time. It's going to be a little bit more effortful. And here's the thing, if you've never experienced a good coach, it behooves you to work with one, because you can listen to this and be like, yeah, I've had an okay coach and I've had some really bad coaches, but I've never really had a good coach. It might actually be worth you going and trying working with a coach, right? Because even if I perfectly described what a great coach should be, it's not the same reading or listening about it as it is experiencing. And coaching yourself, you can be your own first client, but you can't really be your own first coach. You can teach yourself things, and even with the help of cameras, you can figure out your form, but unless you get someone to find the blind spots and call them out for you, there's no way that you're disciplined enough to be the coach and the player, right? You need someone who can look from outside your own perspective, and someone who is willing to stand up against your own opinion of yourself. While you know your body the best, sometimes you need somebody to call you on your BS and the excuse. Now, granted, we don't have as many excuses as most people, but when it comes to things that are emotional, we can have some walls up, okay? And it's like the driver, right? The driver can see things coming steps ahead than the rider, right? You're in the coach, you're riding, you're traveling along, where the driver is out in front. They're able to see further down the road, right? And so it's two different seats in the vehicle. Being the coach, being the driver, means you can't see what's actually how the experience is in the carriage. And being in the carriage means you can't see too far down the road. So I say all this to say you can't occupy both spaces for yourself at the same time. And that's why reading or listening to a podcast about coaching is cool and good, but you're only ever going to get the understanding of a good coach by experiencing it, right? And, maybe that investment is worth it to you. So here's where I'd ask you to sit and think for a second. Now that you know what a good coach should actually do, when you potentially need one, and why nothing transfers to your actual outcomes other than experiencing it, the next step isn't consuming more content, right? It's to get someone in the car with you, to get someone in to help navigate through your health issues, your physical issues, your emotional issues, to go find a coach, right? And if you need help on the health and training side, hit me up. I know where to find a good coach, right? And I know what it's like to get coached by both good and bad. And so with that, that's the end of this one. Go find yourself a coach. Get some help and start to unveil, I always say unveil, reveal the best, healthiest, strongest version of yourself. Talk to you later.